your model shouldn't be using Codable. Doesn't seem to make any sense because you need to decode your JSON. That's what this video is about. Transferring data from one place to another inside your app. Let's go. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this code, but to prove a point, I'm showing how I might download some JSON. And I put it into this model object, and then I can use it in my view controller. So that seems really simple. But you can see within that model object at the top of the screen, we're importing Codable. And that means any change in the back end is going to change our display object. That's not ideal. That means any change in the back end basically changes the front end of our app. Not great. We can do better. So the solution here, which probably isn't the best news, is kind of a bit of re-architecting your app. Because you can get your, what we go call it, data object from either the network or perhaps storage, then we create what is a DTO. So that DTO can have Codable in it. Of course, if you're taking something from the network, you'll probably want to do that. And then you have to have some way of mapping the DTO into your domain object, and the domain object is the object you're going to display on the screen. So your view model will take that domain object, give it to the view controller, and it will be the view controller's responsibility to display that nicely in your UI. So in this diagram, what we've got is our DTOs, either from the network or from your storage. We go into a repository class, which kicks off the mapping of the DTO into the domain objects. And then there's an interactor, which is where these files are pushed to that view model. Now this diagram shows how we might use interactors in repositories. Now I've linked to an actual example in the video description, but what's happening here is the further you move out, the more things change over time. So the external data source and API may well change over time, in which case you use the repository to kind of seal your app off from this change. Now one thing here is you often have one interactor for one repository. There's an argument that you can just use a view model instead of an interactor. However, this means you're putting extra code into view model, which is not necessarily good. It also means you can combine repositories within the interactor rather than having all that logic in the view model, and having many repositories would cause issues with the amount of code you're putting in that view model. And you also get the benefit that you can reuse those interactors. And since they're towards the center of this image, they're unlikely to change. So what we're doing is creating an entity, the actual entity that we display, which we don't want to change over time. So essentially what's happening here is we're trying to have a good separation of concerns and not import all frameworks and rubbish that you don't need into your model. It also gives you the ability, if something changes in your back end, to make those changes within your app without changing all of your Codable stuff. Actually, this is all a pretty good idea. Shouldn't we be doing it?